So now we're going to talk about what digital forensics is. We do this just to make sure we explicitly understand our target. So we're going to start off by talking about two major facets of digital forensics. The first comprises collection, preservation, analysis, and presentation of digital related evidence. Okay, so let's break down all four of those. The first is collection. Collection is where you go onto a crime scene, and crime scenes can vary widely. It can be a server, it can be an office, it can be someone's computer, someone's iPhone. So a crime scene can be very different than the normal crime scene we think of. But the collection is where you go onto the crime scene and you gather the evidence. You gather the digital artifacts. Okay, and digital artifacts we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, the different types, but that is the first part of the process. The second part is the preservation. Okay, preservation is extremely important because if you collect the data and you don't preserve its integrity, it's not going to do you any good in analysis and in court. So you must preserve the data so that you haven't changed it or altered it in any way. You need to be able to accommodate the evidence in bags or cases or boxes or whatever you're going to do just to make sure it stays safe. The analysis might be where you spend most of your time. The analysis is where you examine the digital evidence and you probe the artifacts, the digital artifacts, whatever that might be. Those actually take a lot of different forms, which we'll talk about shortly. But the analysis normally takes hours and hours and hours in a lab because you don't necessarily know what you're looking at. Sometimes you have to probe things and just see what comes up and what surfaces. So while the collection might take, say, several hours, the preservation might take an hour or two. The analysis will take many hours. Finally, presentation of digital related evidence. That means either you're turning over what you found to the prosecutors or to your company or whoever it turns out to be. Possibly you're in court testifying too. So the presentation of the evidence is the fourth part of this, and that's where you're making your case. You're saying, here's what I found, and here's what it means. So the second facet is where you are determining past actions that have taken place. Okay, now why is this important? Well, let's say someone has compromised a server. And this actually happened to me about probably 5 or 6 years ago. Someone had compromised one of our servers. I didn't necessarily even know what they were doing. As it turns out, in a final analysis, they were using it to stage attacks on other servers to obfuscate their path. But I had no clue what they were doing. They might have been stealing data. They might have been installing malicious software. I didn't know. So this whole idea of determining what has happened is really important and not quite as easy as you might think it is. It actually can take quite a bit of effort and quite a bit of detective work on your part. But there are some standard digital forensics techniques that you rely on to track down the past actions. So now let's talk about what the purpose of digital forensics is. Well, there are classic forensics, and this course doesn't cover the classic forensics. We derive our approach to digital forensics from classic forensics. The science of forensics doesn't change just because it's digital forensics. The classic forensics, where you examine a body or you examine blood stain, you take the same approach, however you have different tools and it's different media. That's where our science of digital forensics actually started, in classical forensics. So we use technology to search for digital evidence of a crime. Many times we don't even know if a crime existed or a crime was committed, but we're looking at the evidence to see what is there and what we can deduce. It also includes attempts to retrieve information, and maybe the information has been altered or erased. Sometimes the criminals, the attackers, think that they can erase the data, and therefore you're totally thwarted. But I had a case once a number of years back where someone was trying to destroy a Microsoft Word document. Okay, so the Microsoft Word document had this very incriminating letter on it. So what this person did was they went in and they opened up the Word document. They deleted all the text. They just did a Control-A and hit delete, and all the data was gone. And then they saved on top of the old document file. So the file, if you would have opened up Word to the newly saved document, you would have actually seen nothing. However, that's not the end of the story. I was able to go in and examine the slack space and actually recover quite a bit of the original document. So while I didn't get everything back, I got enough back that I could make a case in court, and that's what I did. So sometimes the criminals can actually alter the data, but a lot of times you can backtrack and come up with a way to still get enough evidence that you can make your case. So there are really two types of digital forensics analyses. One is a live system analysis, and that's where there's some system that is in operation, such as a web server, or maybe a financial server, or something, or a router, or things such as this. And when you're looking at that, you're actually monitoring live data that's in and out, and this is called a live system analysis. And when you do this, you have to actually take a different approach than the other type of analysis, which we're going to talk about, because you can't just stop and unplug the server and say, okay, that's enough. This might be a live server that's processing credit card numbers or doing a number of legitimate things, but you still have to do an analysis and figure out what's going on. The most common analysis, though, is a post-mortem analysis. That means after the crime has been committed, you gather the evidence, as we talked about, and protect it, of course, and then do the analysis. So there's live when stuff is going on and you can't actually be intrusive. You have to just go in and be a part of the digital community and gather information. Then there's post-mortem, where you actually can remove hard drives, you can remove flash drives, you can do whatever you need to do the correct analysis. So typical investigations, there are quite a few types, and I've listed a number here. There are others, but these are the ones that just came to mind. The first may not be as obvious as you think: theft of company secrets. A lot of people who work at companies get paid to reveal company secrets. It's just a fact of life. It's industrial espionage. That's part of the way it's done. That's part of the way company secrets are stolen. So I once did a case where I was down, there was a plant, and they did screen printing, and they were doing a screen print for Nike. Okay, so Nike had sent them the design for the t-shirt that they wanted them to print. Someone at Nike, though, at one point was out on the internet and found the design document before the t-shirts had even been printed. So at this screen printing company, actually what happened was someone took that and uploaded it to the internet even before the shirts were printed. So this is a very good example of the theft of company secrets. I'm not sure they made any money off of it, but still the secret got out. Employee sabotage is more common than you might think. When people get really mad, such as they didn't get the raise they wanted, or there was disciplinary action or something, you know the story. Lots of people in lots of jobs get really mad. Okay, their first tendency is to do some damage. They either are going to quit, or maybe they're getting ready to quit, but they want to do some damage. So the employees can actually do a lot of sabotage, such as altering documents, deleting documents, really messing up all sorts of digital media. Credit card fraud is another really big one. Okay, so what happens is if you have a list of credit cards, those are like a commodity, and there's a given price that people are willing to pay for them. The last I heard was that for every valid credit card you get, you can sell it for about $2. So if you have a list of, say, 100,000 credit card numbers, you can get about $200,000. That's a pretty nice sum of money. So credit card fraud is really hugely popular. So that's the one way where you're getting credit card numbers and you're selling them off. Another way of perpetrating credit card fraud is if you're using someone else's credit card number, or you're faking someone else's credit card credentials, and you're trying to make purchases for goods and services. Financial crimes are pretty popular too. If you can somehow scam, say, an online service or a bank, or say maybe a brokerage service, you can actually get some. You can actually possibly scam them into depositing money in your account. There was a very famous fraud quite a few years back called the salami scam, and it was where a very sharp computer programmer had figured out a way to slice off of each transaction just a fraction of a cent, so nobody ever missed it. But with millions and millions of these fractions of a cent getting deposited into his account, he ended up with a lot of money. So what the salami scam was it was slicing little pieces off of each transaction and putting it into his account. Embezzlement obviously is a big one. Say for instance I might be the auditor, or I might be the accountant or something, so I can actually figure out a way to go in and move money around or be misleading and make sure that I'm able to benefit from whatever happens. Okay, and this is really super important when you're trying to prove a case. Economic crimes, kind of similar thing. Harassment is a really big one. I spent a lot of time on harassment cases. A lot of them were sexual harassment, and that's one of the most common types. But you can have any type of harassment. There have been lots of cases of, say, cyberbullying on Facebook or anywhere else. So there's a lot of harassment, and you, as the investigator, you need to figure out what happened, because then your management might decide whether or not to prosecute, or your client might decide whether or not to prosecute. Before I go on, though, it's really interesting to note that a lot of private companies never prosecute. They just don't want the publicity. So they might find out that something happened and they will fire an individual, but 9 times out of 10 they won't press charges, and that person won't go to court. Child pornography obviously is a very huge one. In this day and age, you would think that people would know they're not going to get away with that, because the NSA is actually tracking everything we do. And truth be told, most companies are tracking everything you do on their networks. I would think that most people by now would understand that this is a very difficult thing to get away with. But you, as the investigator, will need to go ahead and be able to discover. Now, very important, if you ever are investigating a case and you happen upon any kind of a child pornography artifact, you are required immediately to call the cops. There is no option in that case. So just be very careful if you do encounter anything like that, to call law enforcement. Major crimes obviously is a really big one. This would be such as terrorism possibly, or maybe plans to, say, blow up the Empire State Building or something. Who knows? I just made that up, by the way. Identity theft is very huge and has kind of come into its own in the last 8 to 10 years. This is where someone can take your identity, get your social security number, assume your identity via credit card numbers and so forth, and then perpetrate purchases and transactions in your name. So this is part of identity theft. So this is my top list of typical investigations that you might be involved in. But like I said, there are lots more, and you might start thinking now about other types that you could get involved in. There are lots of media devices that hold potential digital data. So let's take a look at the most common items. Obviously, computers and laptops top the list. They potentially hold the largest amount and the most important data for an investigation. That's because these are commonly used by many people for many tasks. iPads and Android tablets, any kind of a tablet is going to have a lot of data on it. iPods, not so much anymore, but iPods and any kind of MP3 is going to have a lot of data. People think that MP3s only hold audio data, but you can use them just like any flash drive, plug them in, and directly copy files to them. Any kind of a smartphone or cell phone can have digital data that lends itself to an investigation, especially now with the Android, Windows, and iOS phones. I mean, they hold 16 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes, and on. And in addition, they're also connected to the cloud, so you have not only what's local on those smartphones, but what's up in the cloud too. Hard drives, which are a subset of the computers and laptops we've already talked about, they will contain the bulk of the data that you're going to look at when you look at computers and laptops. Digital cameras, here again, the same as an MP3 player, except even richer. A camera can have contraband photos, such as maybe child pornography. They can have pictures of a crime scene. A lot of criminals will actually take pictures of the crime scene themselves, not realizing that you can retrieve those and use those against them. In addition, similar to MP3 players, you can actually, from the computer, directly copy other types of files to a digital camera. US memory devices, obviously these can hold pretty much any type of data, and so they should be treated almost just like a hard drive. PDAs aren't around that much more, but you still might encounter them. Possibly someone is using an old PDA just to kind of throw you off. Backup tapes, these aren't going to be in a home necessarily, but in a server room or in a server facility where the backups are kept. CD-ROMs and DVDs, obviously, and don't forget that a lot of CDs and a lot of DVDs are read-write. So we used to always think about CDs and DVDs as having data that persists, but now with the read-write CDs and DVDs, you can overwrite some of the data that's already there. So what can computer forensics actually do? Okay, well, it can recover deleted files, and this capability has been around since the beginning of time, since the beginning of computers. Sometimes, files get deleted for whatever reason, accidentally or whatever. I once ran an old bulletin board system. That was before the internet. Well, actually, the internet was around, but before the internet was popularized, people used to connect to bulletin board systems just using a modem. So I had a bulletin board system which I ran, and I had sort of assistant sysops, systems operators, who would log in and help me maintain the bulletin board because it was a highly trafficked bulletin board. And somehow one of their passwords got leaked out, and someone logged on and deleted all my files. So I shut down the server, and I had to go through and recover all the deleted files, which fortunately most of them were recoverable. So I was back up in it within 24 hours. So recovering deleted files is something you'll do a lot. Now, this is similar to what I mentioned before, where someone overwrote a Microsoft Word document with a new document to kind of obfuscate what they'd done or what the original letter was. So it's kind of a similar thing. You're still addressing low-level file access. And we actually spent an entire week talking about this and doing this. So it's also important if we know what external devices have been attached to a computer. So if you put a USB stick into a computer, you know that a driver comes up and the driver allows the computer to talk to the stick, the USB stick. Okay, well, that driver actually can leave a fingerprint, and you can go back and see that USB stick had been plugged in. Determine what programs ran. This is more difficult, but possible. So what programs ran, you can do a memory, you can examine memory, because just like a deleted file, a deleted program is still in memory until that memory gets overwritten. Recovering web pages, this is fairly straightforward. So all web browsers have a cache of formerly accessed web pages. This makes the browser faster. And the reason for this is because if you cache the web pages, you don't always necessarily have to go out to the server and retrieve them every time. You can use the cache version, display it, and that'll save a lot of bandwidth traffic. But even if a user deletes these web pages, for instance, you can go into Internet Explorer options and go ahead and delete all your cache data, you can still recover those. So this is a really important thing to do. People think that just because they deleted their cache data that they're safe and nobody can see what they've done. The fact is you can still go through and recover that data. Recover emails and users who read them. So emails obviously contain a lot of incriminating evidence. I'm actually now doing some consulting for a company that's helping Sony. And recently in the news, or not, maybe 6 months ago, Sony's CEO had sent a bunch of really horrendous emails, and the whole company got a lot of bad press, and the CEO obviously got fired. So email contains a lot of information that can lead to a lot of bad consequences. Recovering chat logs. Chat obviously can contain a lot of very nefarious information, so companies have to be really careful about letting their employees chat, and if they do let them chat, they need to be able to track what they're saying. By the way, you think, well, is this an invasion of privacy that the company is able to see what employees are doing in their chat? Well, the answer is, okay, if the employee is at home, yes, it's invasive, but if they are at work, a precedent has been set that the company owns the resources, the network, the computers, so the company has every right to snoop on your emails, chats, and so forth. So a lot of times you're going to have to figure out what file servers have been used, like where files have been shuffled around on a network. Discovering a document's history is very important. In this course, we're going to have a whole week where we talk about low-level file stuff. We'll be talking about that. Recovering phone records is pretty important, SMS text messages. So that's referring to mobile devices, obviously. So there's quite a difference between retrieving stuff from a laptop or a computer than mobile devices. The mobile devices, in order to really access those, you need specialized hardware. And the last thing I'd like to point out, so you're going to have to find malware and the data that the malware collected. So who uses computer forensics? Law enforcement does. In fact, law enforcement is who we point to first. Law enforcement, many police departments actually have a separate digital forensics division. The city of New York, Manhattan, actually has a digital forensics division that consists of over 50 officers. So they are so busy and so dedicated, they have to have at least 50 officers just for digital forensics. So law enforcement is a common user of digital forensics techniques. Lots of private computer forensics organizations. Now, that's where I have the majority of my experience. A lot of PIs, a lot of agencies who are doing investigations for hire are going to be using digital forensics techniques, and they're going to go in and say, let's say I have a company and I think that one of my employees is doing something incorrect or something illegal. So I might call, before I blow the whistle and alert that employee that I suspect something, I might call an agency. The agency might come in and take a look or install monitoring software or whatever. And as I said, most private companies do not prosecute individuals who've broken the law unless they have to, such as, say, maybe a drug case or a child pornography case or something like that. They just want that employee discovered and gone, and they don't want to have the publicity of a court case. The military uses it a lot. For instance, when we first went into Afghanistan, we actually had tapped into their entire pipe, their entire internet pipe, and we were monitoring what went in and what went out. So they were using these forensics techniques to determine what different people on that Afghanistan pipe were saying. University programs, which you are part of right now, this is another big area of people who explore and use digital forensics. And lastly, computer security and IT professionals are using digital forensics. So it's a really big part of the industry. And right now it's growing at a very fast clip. So you, as a student of digital forensics, should be able to get a solid job once you get out. So take a look at this image. It provides a nice overview of the relationship between all of the facets of digital forensics. Note that at the very center are the digital forensics research. Without the research, this science would not be able to move forward. Deal with the latest threats. Don't forget that the criminals and the bad guys are always trying to be one step ahead of you. So notice that there are three separate areas. There's law enforcement, there's information warfare, and there's critical infrastructure. Well, critical infrastructure is the sort of business side of this. And like I said, they're the ones who are going to be silent about the cases, but they're the ones who have a lot to lose if their employees or if their employees are doing the wrong things or outsiders are attacking them and getting through. Information warfare, this is mostly military, and don't forget that they say that World War III is going to be a cyber war and not a hot war. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what some people say. And of course, there's law enforcement, which is making sure that we are safe as citizens. Note that law enforcement is going to overlap at least somewhat with information warfare and critical infrastructure. They all overlap at least to a certain degree. For instance, if I'm in a company and I notice something that definitely is illegal, I am obligated to report it to law enforcement. However, if I don't find something that's illegal but just against company policy, I don't have to. So there's that overlap between cases I have to report and cases that I don't have to report. So let's break down law enforcement a bit more. This involves local, state, and federal levels. Mostly, from what I've seen, investigations happen at the state level. Many local authorities, with the exception of places such as New York, Manhattan, and larger cities, but most local municipalities do not have the resources to dedicate people to do digital forensics investigations. So they rely on the state level law enforcement to come in and do an investigation and find out what happened. And obviously on the federal level, there is a lot of digital forensics investigation resources. And on the federal level, this is mostly going to be the FBI. The FBI spearheads most of the digital forensics investigations. Now, you could argue that the NSA is actually spearheading it, and if you did argue that, you might be correct, but let's just say we're living in this perfect world and the NSA isn't spying on us like they are. It's the FBI's main responsibility to spearhead the digital investigations. There are lots of labs, forensics labs, and as with, say, normal forensics investigations, some of these labs are shared between local, state, and federal. So, for instance, a lot of state forensics investigations can potentially send their evidence up to Quantico to have it analyzed by the feds. So, there's quite a long list of private computer forensics organizations. What they try to do is establish and maintain standards. And this list includes the Radley Forensics, Computer Forensics Associates, BitXBit, Empire Investigation, Marino Technology, Advanced Forensics, Philadelphia Computer Forensics, Philadelphia Computer Forensics Analysis and Investigations. Those are two groups that actually split apart because of infighting. New York Computer Forensic Services, Spec and Forensic Labs. The military application of digital forensics, in general, is quite different than the civilian application of digital forensics. For instance, most of their work happens in the field. They have to test, identify, and gather evidence in the field. Please note there's a big difference. They don't necessarily have to protect their data the way you do in a civilian case. They also don't necessarily have to protect against altering the data inadvertently. In a court of law, that would mean that the evidence would get thrown out. However, in the field, for the military, they're not trying to prove a case. They're just trying to get to the bottom of something. So it's a quite different approach to gathering and protecting and analyzing evidence. They also would want to analyze the data much quicker than you might in a civilian case. The faster they get their answers, the better their response is going to be to some sort of a threat. So for these reasons, quick analysis time is key for them. So you're in a university program and you're studying digital forensics. So what does that mean for you? Well, Here at UCF, we have programs for the bachelor's and master's degree students. We don't quite have a PhD program here yet, and I'm not even sure if there are plans for that. But at the moment, we offer a bachelor's and master's degree in digital forensics. What we teach is incident response techniques, and I've already mentioned that, and the difference between that and the postmortem. We also are involved in many well-funded research areas. For instance, we do have a relationship with the NSA and other organizations that are pretty famous, I would say, and that's a very good opportunity for you as a digital forensics student. We also get a lot of free resources, such as FTK as tools, such as online tools, and we also get lots of images to practice on. Community colleges also are getting into the act. For quite a few years, community colleges have been offering digital forensics programs. I was involved in one when I lived in North Carolina, as a matter of fact. They're not quite as complete as a four-year degree, but they still give the basics. Some of the programs I was involved in, though, specialized in teaching law enforcement. For instance, I'd have uniformed policemen come and take my classes. They had taken an hour or two off of work, and they were still fully uniformed, and they were still carrying their guns. So that was an odd and interesting feeling to have uniformed and armed cops in my classroom. The community college is also great for working professionals because the schedules tend to be a lot more flexible. So for computer security professionals, there is a large array of applications for digital forensics. Network traffic is a big one. Looking at network traffic to figure out what is currently going on and what has gone on is very important. In this way, you can find out things such as maybe financial fraud and abuse and so forth. You can also tell when your network has been compromised. And we've already talked about the insider threats, such as disgruntled employees. Well, this is a very large application for computer security professionals to use digital forensics. Malware is a huge area that has to be guarded against. And so this is another application of digital forensics, breach of contracts. Email obviously is huge. Like I told you, there's that Sony case I've been involved in peripherally, and email is going to be an ongoing issue for digital forensics investigators. Theft of company documents, we've already discussed that. If you're a computer security professional, this will be a very good opportunity for you to use your skills. So here are some really important factors. Legal procedures. Without being totally legit, totally following the law, any evidence you gather is going to get thrown out of court. You might actually even go to jail yourself if you do something really over the edge. So you cannot compromise evidence when you gather it. You have to treat everything as potential evidence. It could possibly be used in court. Like I was mentioning before, you don't necessarily know what is evidence and what isn't. You don't necessarily know what you're going to find and what you won't find. You have to document everything. Just document, document, document. There's something we'll talk about later in this course called chain of custody. Very important, chain of custody, so that you can absolutely prove where a piece of evidence originated and where it has ended and every step along the way. Write blocks and imaging are going to be two of the things we talk about later with regards to analysis of data and FTK. We've been looking at some of the do's. Now let's look at some of the don'ts. Let's talk about the things that you need to avoid during an investigation. Changing data is at the top of the list. If you change data on purpose or inadvertently, the data is probably going to be inadmissible. This includes changing time or date stamps. You've got to be really careful because, for instance, when you even just open a file to look at it, you can actually change some of its timestamps. Changing files, obviously, opening a file and changing the actual data, that's another big no-no. Overwriting unallocated disk space. And in this course, we're going to do some exercises where we actually access the slack space. That's the space between the end of a file and actually the end of the cluster. So it's very easy to destroy data by doing any kind of disk writes. This can also even just happen when you reboot. You also must verify hash values from images, and we'll get into that later on in this course. Subcategories of DFS. Okay, there are three distinct types. Media analysis, such as hard drives, CD-ROMs, and so forth. Code analysis, that's where you are looking for malicious signatures, possibly reverse engineering. We will do some of that. And network analysis. Network analysis is when you're looking on the network to see what's going on. So the media analysis, sometimes they call it computer forensics. I might recommend that you stay away from the computer forensics. It's still digital forensics. Media analysis is normally the focus of the various storage media, such as hard drives, CD-ROM, flash drives, etc. It does exclude network analysis. So here are the 3 A's of digital forensics. Acquire the evidence without altering or damaging the original. Okay, and remember the first slide or two we even talked about. That's the very first step in any kind of investigation. Authenticate the image. So if you authenticate the image, what you're doing is you're providing evidence that the image is identical to the original image. Analyzing the data without modifying it. Okay, so these are the 3 A's of digital forensics investigations. So what are the specific challenges? Where's the crime scene? You don't necessarily know where the crime scene is. As we've talked about before, it's a little more nebulous. It's not like you come onto a scene and you find a dead body with pools of blood. Sometimes the crime scene is maybe in the cloud, maybe on a flash drive that someone else has, or so forth. Okay, so you have a perpetrator system and a victim system, and there may or may not be some sort of crossover. What are some other specific challenges? What constitutes evidence? You're going to have to ask that question many times. I would err on the side of caution and say that something is evidence, even though I don't necessarily know how it fits in. If you admit something into evidence, then you can always, refer back to it. If you don't admit it into evidence, then you're going to have a hard time later on pulling it into the evidence pool. What are you looking for? You don't always know. You don't always know what to look for and what you're going to find. So this slide talks about network forensics and the facets of network forensics. So at the center we have this network forensics circle, and there's cybersecurity, which is passwords, encryption, authentication, and a lot of that falls into the IT world. Maybe what your sort of network, maybe what your network admin is taking care of. Intrusion detection and penetration testing is the science of looking at the network traffic and figuring out what's going on. Legal matters, you're always going to have to know what the law is. You're always going to have to at least have a good idea, because if you don't, you run the risk of either ruining data or doing something wrong, which might blow the whole case. Information security process, you've got to do risk assessment, policy audits, and so forth. And maybe in that way you can actually prevent the digital forensics incidences from happening. Finally, forensics and incidents reporting. You've got to collect your evidence, preserve it, analyze it, and report on it.